SLT Mobitel Fiber, the fiber of the nation. SLT Mobitel Fiber, the fiber of the nation.
නියම දෙහිසාරය සහිත විම් ලික්විඩ්.
එක හැන්දයි.
පිරිමැස්මයි.
Tonight, global menace. Sri Lanka's permanent representative to the United Nations in New York tells the Assembly not to cherry-pick terrorists for condemnation.
Without reverting to the reprehensible alternative of seeking to penalize those states that have defeated terrorism.
Another snag. The Attorney General deems that provincial council elections cannot be held without a new act.
Being the previous administration, we must bear responsibility for having messed up the electoral system.
Pilot project. 17 to 19-year-olds in Colombo to be given the COVID jab from the 15th.
We are only giving one dose of Pfizer biotech vaccine, which will be given only as a single dose.
Seeing the light. The United States decides to accept WHO-recognized COVID vaccines. All that and much more coming up on First at 9, this Saturday, the 9th of October, 2021.
Kill Smart Family Season 4.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening, welcome to First at 9, I'm Dhammi Kekanai. Now, Sri Lanka's permanent representative to the United Nations in New York, Mohan Peiris, told the Assembly that countries should not be punished for defeating terrorism and instead their input should be sought in eliminating the global menace. Addressing the 6th Committee, 4th meeting at the General Assembly's 76th session yesterday, Peiris also brought to the attention of the Assembly how the modern-day terror tactics are becoming more and more sophisticated and called for a global response to tackle terrorism.
Sri Lanka remains deeply concerned that despite the topic of terrorism being on the agenda of the UN for many long years, the collective response to terrorism is at most times hindered by our varied priorities. An important aspect would be to look forward on the draft Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism. The inability to conclude negotiations for over a decade signals how divided we really are on this subject, and I'm fairly sure the terrorists love it. Given the increasingly transnational and multifaceted nature of terrorism, it calls for a strong multilateral response with genuine collaboration among states with a unified voice. Sri Lanka is of the firm belief that the United Nations has and will continue to have an important role to play in coordinating an effective global response to terrorism. I would urge the UN to unselectively draw on national experiences of member states to confront terrorism without reverting to the reprehensible alternative of seeking to penalize those states that have defeated terrorism. We can all learn from each other. As a country that has experienced terrorism for nearly 30 years and as one of the very few countries that has actually defeated terrorism on our soil, Sri Lanka condemns unequivocally and in the strongest possible terms terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. All acts of terrorism are criminal and unjustifiable regardless of their motivation. I wish to reiterate that terrorist acts are attacks on all of us, and it is high time for us to unite and act in solidarity to combat this menace. We cannot afford to be selective. We cannot afford to state that certain acts of terrorism are justifiable, and we certainly cannot afford to condemn some terrorists and turn a blind eye to others.
On the 6th of May this year, the Ontario Legislative Assembly in Canada passed the Bill 104, which was tabled by a known LTT supporter. In doing so, Ontario became the first jurisdictions in the world to recognize a genocide against Tamils in Sri Lanka. When High Commissioner of Canada David McKinnon called on Foreign Minister Professor G.L. Peiris yesterday, the minister reiterated Sri Lanka's strong concern regarding the relevant private member's public bill. The foreign minister conveyed Sri Lanka's objection to the unacceptable association of genocide in relation to the past conflict in Sri Lanka. The minister also recalled that the LTT is a proscribed terrorist organization in Canada. The Canadian High Commissioner, however, noted that this issue, which was a decision by the Ontario Legislative Assembly, is in a judicial process relating to a constitutional question and agreed to keep the minister informed of developments, as shown in the case of Bill 104. Sri Lanka's permanent representative to the United Nations in New York, Mohan Peris, also elaborated on the strategy changes of the modern-day terror outfits.
The terrorist organizations of today, its proponents no longer use the traditional brick and mortar ways to carry out their activities. They are far more sophisticated than you and I can ever dream of. Even the use of social media as a tool through which terrorist organizations spread their fundamentalist ideology and recruit and indoctrinate our youth is now something that we are all familiar with. For most countries that have grappled with terrorism, attacks against soft targets by terrorists are not new. International networks with linkages to organized crime continue to remain a critical lifeline for terrorist groups. However, we now witness a new dimension of these networks. These networks use people. They use educated people, people with impeccable backgrounds, and are bringing affluent people to propagate their ideologies, raise funds, and to achieve their ultimate objectives. The tools that are used by these networks to infiltrate our hearts are the very tools that we at the United Nations endeavor to promote and protect. How do we then deal with these new developments? Sharing of intelligence, databases, and expertise amongst members should take into consideration these developments, and we need to pool our resources that we can effectively counter this problem. Sri Lanka, as a responsible member of the international community, remains committed to international cooperation to combat terrorism and look forward to dealing with this menace in a multifaceted way. The multifaceted nature of the strong points of terrorists in this brutal warfare calls for nothing less than a global-scale collaborative response that is stubbornly radical, yet humanely civil. Our predecessors have done some good work that has left our world a safer place to be in today. But we need a more direct strategy can endure for as long as the threat persists without hurting the sovereignty of nations and human rights of the same people it seeks to protect. We can gain a lot more striving for harmonious coexistence than we can by giving it to hate-filled rage and fear-driven ignorance.
In the meantime, Minister of Justice, President's Counsel Ali Sabri states that the Muslim community has a massive role to play in eliminating the breeding grounds for extremism of any kind here in Sri Lanka. Speaking to Indivri Amuat at Hyde Park on AdaDerana 24, the Minister noted that the authorities should work with the community to nip any possible extremism issue in the bud. What's more, he added that the government is also looking at rolling out a Harmony Act.
If we turn to talk about fake news, hate speech and laws surrounding this, we spoke about the requirement for bringing regulation similar to the First Amendment in the United States. What kind of progress are we making here?
There are a few areas using internet or any other media in order to harass small children, the women, obscene publication that was just passed by the cabinet will go to parliament one of these days. Second one is about the fake news, not to prevent criticism but deliberate misleading of subject. All over the world people have brought that kind of laws. So we are in the final stage of rolling that out. That will probably come within the next month or two. Thirdly, the Harmony Act, in order to bring all the communities together, is being discussed now in the same line as the Singaporean Act of 1990. So these three sets of amendments will cover most of the legal requirements.
How will this law enable the monitoring of social media usage and hate speech?
What we are proposing is to set up a commission. A person who is being aggrieved by that can complain to the commission. Commission can ask those sites to take it down. If they don't take it down, they can go to a magistrate court and ask it to be brought it down. Thereafter, at the court, if found to be violating the laws, they could be charged. And we are only trying to recognize the technological advancement of these offences.
As a member of the Sri Lankan minority community, how satisfied are you in the progress we're making towards communal harmony?
It's a long way to go. We have not been able to make the amount of progress we would have liked to have. A deep suspicion amongst the people, and unfortunately there are some who thrives on this suspicion and doubts, and they make a name for themselves and they have made an art of living with that. So that's a huge challenge for us. But my ministry, through the ONUR, that is Office of National Unity and Reconciliation, and the Office of Reparation, and the Missing Persons, OMP, we have been working very hard, particularly towards winning the hearts and minds of the Tamils and the Muslims and the vulnerable, and also within the majority, the need to coexist so that the way forward for Sri Lanka's development, where everyone will feel safe and dignified. In terms of prosecuting, there is this sentiment amongst the minorities, they have been singled out. No ICCRP or whatever it is when it comes to application, it's not been equally applied. So that's a matter we need to address on the long run. When you continue to advance this divisive agenda, no one is going to be safe. And that includes 80% of the Sinhalese, 10% of the Tamils, and 9% of the Muslims.
What measures can we take in order to eliminate those brewing grounds for extremists and youth being radicalized?
That's a huge challenge, and the community itself must take a massive role on that. And government need to engage the community and give the responsibility towards the community and trust them, because these are very, very few people on this. We are in the process of bringing some of the laws which are required. If the radicalization take place within the Muslim community by large need to take a great responsibility, and in the meantime the law enforcement authority need to trust them just like in other countries and work with the communities, because it is from the community you can get the information about these trends so that you can nip it in the bud.
Moving on with other local news, the already delayed provincial council elections seem to be heading towards a further delay. The Attorney General's Department has informed the government that the provincial council polls cannot be held even if the existing act is repealed.
The long-delayed provincial council polls in the country remains an unresolved issue, with a solution far from sight. In the latest update regarding the matter, the Attorney General has informed of legal impediments that's blocking the way for PC elections. Notifying the Attorney General's stance to the Parliamentary Select Committee appointed to identify appropriate reforms of the election laws and the electoral systems and to recommend necessary amendments, Committee Chairman Minister Dinesh Gunawardena said that even if the existing act is repealed, there's no way the PC elections can be held without passing a new act. The issue surrounding the provincial council elections did not pop up overnight and dates back to the previous administration. With the term of office of the provincial councils coming to an end, the previous regime appointed a 5-member delimitation committee to determine the constituency boundaries in order to hold the provincial council elections on a mixed proportional system. But the committee's report was defeated in Parliament, pushing back the PC elections further. The matter not only made headlines in the country but also grabbed attention of global community. In the resolution adopted at the Human Rights Council in March, the core group on the country headed by the United Kingdom did not fail to mention the delayed PC polls. It called on the government of Sri Lanka to respect local governance and hold elections for provincial councils and ensure that all provincial councils, including the Northern and Eastern provincial councils, are able to operate effectively in accordance with the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. Meanwhile, during Thursday's Parliament sitting, Samagi Janabalawegaya parliamentarian Rauf Hakim, who was also a minister of the previous administration, admitted that the previous government is responsible for the debacle surrounding the PC polls.
The visiting Indian foreign minister too has made a specific request about the implementation of the 13th Amendment. Now, the implementation of the 13th Amendment means re-establishing, conducting elections for the provincial councils. So therefore, he is making a request to the government that the provincial council elections be conducted early. Honorable Dinesh Gunawardena is quite aware the interest of the government of India regarding the need to strengthen the 13th Amendment, and in order to strengthen the 13th Amendment, in the first place, we have to conduct the elections. Now, elections have been postponed for several years now. I am sure with this simple amendment, government can enable that these provincial council elections could be held fast. Therefore, I would once again urge the government considers this and that we do not wait until next local government elections are due. Being the previous administration, we must bear responsibility for having messed up the electoral system. I am one who opposed that. But unfortunately, that bill became law, and then delimitation process became such an antagonistic process. Finally, the minister himself voted against the delimitation report. That was the biggest joke that we encountered in this house.
We attempted to contact former Minister of Local Government and Provincial Councils Faiza Mustafa, who played a key role as the subject minister in bringing about the change in the electoral systems, which subsequently delayed the elections. However, our efforts proved futile.
We will see you shortly. Bear with us.
Big 3.
Welcome back. This is First at 9. Now, health authorities said today that efforts, or before it commences, an island-wide vaccine program for children aged 18 and 19 on the 21st of this month. A pilot project will be launched in the Colombo district. The pilot project will commence on the 15th with the inoculation of children in the 17 to 19 age group with the Pfizer vaccine. What's more, it has been decided to give children a single dose of the jab.
The current focus of Sri Lanka's vaccine drive is now on people aged between 20 to 29 and children over the age of 12 with comorbidities. In just a few weeks, over 60% of vaccination with one dose in the 20 to 29 year age group has been achieved. This comes at the heels of 98% full immunization of the country's total population of over 30s. Head of the National Operations Centre for the Prevention of COVID-19, Army Commander General Shavindra Silva says that in some districts 80 to 90% of people between 20 to 29 years of age have been partially vaccinated. In some other districts, that percentage is 75. As for child vaccinations, the first phase is still underway. The inoculation of children between 12 and 20 years of age with comorbidities hasn't seen complications, as no incidents of adverse side effects have been reported so far. However, it is not to say that there hasn't been side effects. Fever, redness and pain at the site of the jab have been common, and since that's the case, health experts urge parents to get their children vaccinated when the opportunity arises.
The government as well as the Ministry of Health has decided to vaccinate adolescents and young people from 19 to 17 to be started with and move down to 16 years. The Advisory Committee on Communicable Diseases has given their approval to give the vaccine to this. That will be started as a pilot project on 15th of this month in the Colombo Educational Zone with the collaboration of Ministry of Health and Ministry of Education. And after that, on 21st of this month, the vaccination program will be rolled out all over the country to vaccinate children and adolescents and young people from 19 years to downwards.
Professor Rajendra Jit went on to explain the vaccine dosage that will be given to school children.
We are only giving one dose of Pfizer biotech vaccine, which will be given only as a single dose, and we will reevaluate the situation and new data coming from all over the world, and we will decide the timing of the second dose depending on the data availability, and that will go through the Advisory Committee on Communicable Diseases.
As the world sees more and more inoculation campaigns coming towards their end, the need for booster doses has surfaced. It is a contentious topic, and even the World Health Organization isn't recommending it just yet. The existing global vaccine supply issues and the lack of data to suggest the need for booster shot at this juncture has been key in delaying a general booster recommendation. However, the WHO says that a third dose for those who are immunocompromised and did not receive the intended level of protection from the 2 doses of the jab should be given a third shot. Whatever the WHO stance may be, without wanting to be caught out, the government said today that a purchase order has been made with Pfizer-BioNTech to procure 14.5 million vaccine doses for the administration of the booster doses in Sri Lanka.
මේ ලැබෙන එන්නත් අපි බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා ආරම්භයේදී විශේෂයෙන්ම වෙනත් රෝගාබාධ වලින් පෙළෙන විශේෂයෙන්ම නිදන්ගත රෝග වලින් පෙළෙන වැඩිහිටියන්ට තුන්වෙනි මාත්‍රාව ලබා දෙන්න. ඒ වගේම ඉදිරි පෙළ සෞඛ්‍ය සේවකයන්ට තුන්වෙනි මාත්‍රාව ලබා දෙන්න, ආරක්ෂක අංශවල අයට තුන්වෙනි මාත්‍රාව ලබා දෙන්න. ඒ වගේම එන්නත් ලැබෙන අනුපිළිවෙල අනුව ක්‍රමානුකූලව අවුරුදු 20ට වැඩි සියලුම දෙනාට ෆයිසර් තුන්වෙනි මාත්‍රාව හැටියට ඉදිරි කාලයේදී ලබා දෙන්න අප සැලසුම් කරලා තියෙනවා.
Meanwhile, Sri Lanka has now fully vaccinated over 55% of the country's total population with the 2 primary doses against COVID-19. Further, over 60% have been given at least 1 dose. Though Sri Lanka had its fair share of difficulties in procuring vaccines, somehow they were overcome. But there are many countries in the world who are not that fortunate.
More than 6.4 billion vaccine doses have now been administered globally, and almost 1/3 of the world's population is fully vaccinated against COVID-19. But those numbers mask a horrifying inequity. High and upper middle income countries have used 75% of all vaccines produced so far. Low income countries have received less than half of 1% of the world's vaccines. In Africa, less than 5% of people are fully vaccinated.
With underprivileged countries around the world continuing to struggle with access to vaccines, there has been calls for pharmaceutical companies to waive intellectual property rights and share vaccine technology. Even though great quantities of COVID vaccines are produced in the world, people continue to die with no access to the jab. It is becoming evident that COVID isn't the killer anymore, but the lack of access to these essential vaccines.
This demonstrates that, unfortunately, fight COVID-19 pandemic, leadership and power are not aligned. WHO, the whole UN system have shown leadership, but we have no power. We have no power to force companies to license or to make countries accept that the TRIPS will not apply. We cannot force countries to organize their vaccination programs in order to take into account also the vaccination programs of other countries.
Now, the United States will accept travelers into the country who are immunized with the World Health Organization approved COVID vaccines. There are still many countries in the West which are yet to adopt a similar approach, drawing criticism across the board.
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the United States announced yesterday that the country will accept any persons arriving who have been immunized with a vaccine authorized by US regulators or the World Health Organization. The new COVID-19 vaccine requirements will now apply to nearly all foreign nationals flying to the United States, including those not subject to prior restrictions. It is welcome news for Sri Lanka as well, since those who have aspirations for visiting the United States further down the line will now not be required to obtain a certain brand of vaccine, eliminating much of the hassle. Failure to recognize all the COVID vaccines the WHO has approved for emergency use also carry other problems.
I think we have to recognize why it's a problem that those vaccines that are WHO emergency use listed are by some countries not being recognized. COVID vaccines are not a vaccine that is required under IHR for travel, so we want to reinforce that that is not a requirement for travel, notwithstanding that there may be some differences about quarantine measures or other things if people are traveling with or without having been vaccinated. But the other reason that it's such an important issue is that it's pushing people to be vaccinated with more doses than they would otherwise be recommended to receive if the vaccines that they've already received that are WHO EUL'd are not recognized. And this again is not something that we should be doing in the face of constrained supply and inadequate supply at this point in countries where people are receiving and seeking out vaccines that they otherwise wouldn't need for the purpose of their own protection.
Following the removal of the price controls, prices of imported milk powder has been increased with effect from today. Accordingly, a kilogram of imported milk powder is increased by 250 rupees to be sold at 1,195 rupees, while the price of a 400-gram pack of imported milk powder will retail at 480 rupees following a 100 rupee hike.
Following the progress review meeting between President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and the Cabinet of Ministers yesterday, State Minister of Consumer Protection issued a new Gazette notification revoking the Gazette declaring milk powder, wheat flour, gas and cement as essential commodities. Following the move, Chairman of the Consumer Affairs Authority, Major General Shant Dissanayake, issued a new Gazette notification nullifying the maximum retail price for the said commodities. With the removal of the controlled prices, Milk Powder Importers Association hiked the price of a kilo of imported powdered milk by 250 rupees and a 400-gram pack of it by 100 rupees. As per the new prices, a kilo of imported milk powder is sold at 1,195 rupees, while a 400-gram pack will retail at 480 rupees. Meanwhile, the Sri Lanka Cement Corporation has decided to up the price of a bag of cement by 93 rupees, meaning it will now cost 1,098 rupees. As for wheat flour and gas, the new prices are yet to be determined. Sri Lanka has a long history of price controls and successive governments have imposed price controls, with fuel being the most notable one. Prices in Sri Lanka are not determined according to global markets, with governments deliberately keeping prices down while incurring losses to give relief to the people. Price controls have its positives and negatives, but in any case, an expert view is that there is no room for price controls in an economy.
When the economy has no systematic policy framework and regulatory framework, and the decisions are quite ad hoc and taken on piecemeal basis, they actually affect people's lives, they affect the economy, and they affect our development process as well. At the moment, the Sri Lankan economy has been slowing down and going in recession path, and in this kind of setup, we took certain commodities under price controls and we took them away from price controls, not because of any policy reform framework, any coherent policy direction, but because of various needs and interest of various parties, and it caused the damages to the economy. When the price controls are removed, the prices are likely to go up, and when the price controls are in place, which is not a good initiative, it also causes damages to the economy. If there is a coherent economic management system is in place, the price controls should not be there in that economy. And that's the base system that we need to have. And if it is the direction that we have established in the country over a long period of time, then there is no damage to the people.
And that's it from all of us here at First at 9. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.